The United States and Iran have offered sharply different accounts of an incident involving a U.S.-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM says IRGC boats harassed a U.S.-flagged tanker during its transit through the strait. Iranian state-linked outlets and officials claim the tanker entered Iranian waters and left after a warning, insisting there was no serious security incident. The competing narratives illustrate how the same events can be framed entirely differently depending on perspective. What CENTCOM characterizes as harassment, Iran characterizes as a warning to a vessel allegedly in its waters. Neither account can be independently verified. The incident occurred amid escalating tensions between Washington and Tehran, with U.S. military assets deployed to the region and diplomatic talks reportedly being arranged. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply, making any incident there significant for global markets. The framing of who was the aggressor depends entirely on which account you accept. CENTCOM presents Iran as threatening transit. Iran presents itself as responding to an intrusion into its territorial waters. CENTCOM says IRGC boats harassed a U.S.-flagged tanker during its transit through the strait, according to the official statement from spokesperson Captain Tim Hawkins. CENTCOM portrays the approach as unprovoked and says the tanker was on a lawful transit route. Hawkins said 2 IRGC boats and an Iranian Mohajer drone approached the tanker MV Stina Imperative at high speed and threatened to board it, according to CENTCOM. The guided missile destroyer USS McFall escorted the vessel with defensive air support until the situation de-escalated. The U.S. argues commercial ships have transit rights through international straits, while Iran disputes this in specific cases. This legal disagreement underlies many incidents in the Strait of Hormuz. Open-source tracking showed the tanker heading toward Bahrain, while CENTCOM said it proceeded safely after the escort. The vessel's safe continuation is confirmed. The characterization of the encounter remains disputed. The Wall Street Journal reported a different number of boats involved, citing U.S. officials who said as many as 6 armed Iranian boats approached the tanker, ordering it to shut down its engines and prepare to be boarded. The vessel refused, accelerating instead as a U.S. warship rushed in to escort it. The discrepancy between CENTCOM's account of 2 boats and the Wall Street Journal's report of 6 boats illustrates the uncertainty in such situations. Different sources within the U.S. government may have different information or characterizations. U.S. officials cited by the WSJ described it as an attempted boarding. Iran denies that characterization. The gap between these accounts cannot be resolved from available public information. That wording aligns with how U.S. officials describe repeated maritime confrontations in the strait. Similar characterizations have been used in past incidents, creating a pattern of framing that serves the U.S. narrative. UKMTO issued an advisory about an incident in the area, urging vessels to transit with caution. This third-party reporting confirms an incident occurred but does not definitively establish which narrative is accurate. Vanguard, a maritime risk group, provided additional details. Vanguard's account says the tanker did not respond to VHF calls and increased speed, according to their reporting on the incident. The tanker not responding to radio calls could support either interpretation, refusing harassment, or refusing a legitimate warning from coastal authorities. The same facts support different narratives. Reports on past incidents show shots have been fired in some confrontations. For example, Reuters reported rounds hit the Richmond Voyager's hull in 2023. Such incidents have occurred periodically during periods of U.S.-Iran tension. Iranian state-linked outlets and officials claim the tanker entered Iranian waters without permission and left after being warned, insisting there was no serious security incident, according to Iranian reporting on the government's position. This framing presents Iran as responding to a territorial intrusion rather than harassing innocent passage. If the tanker did enter Iranian waters, Iran would have legitimate authority under its domestic law to warn it and request it leave. Iran's side denies an attempted boarding and frames it as a routine warning, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. The Iranian version presents the interaction as standard coastal enforcement, not an aggressive act against commercial shipping. Public reporting has not produced a definitive shared data set that settles the waters question, so both claims remain disputed. Without independently verified tracking data showing the tanker's exact position, neither narrative can be confirmed. The U.S. argues commercial ships have transit rights through international straits, while Iran disputes this in specific cases involving what it considers its territorial waters. This legal disagreement creates ongoing friction. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, vessels generally have the right of transit passage through straits used for international navigation. However, coastal states retain certain rights over their territorial waters. The competing legal frameworks mean incidents will continue to occur at the intersection of these claims. Each side believes international law supports its position. From Iran's perspective, warning a vessel that entered its waters is a measured response. From the U.S. perspective, interfering with commercial shipping in an international strait is unacceptable. Both positions have legal arguments supporting them. Separately, the U.S. military reported shooting down an Iranian drone near the USS Abraham Lincoln. CENTCOM says an F-35C shot down an Iranian Shahed 139 that approached the carrier. Iranian state-linked media calls it a Shahed 129 and says contact was lost after a surveillance mission. CENTCOM described the approach as aggressive while saying the drone's intent was unclear, according to the official U.S. statement. The F-35C from the carrier's air wing destroyed the drone in what officials describe as an act of self-defense. CENTCOM says U.S. forces attempted de-escalatory measures first, then fired when the drone kept closing, according to the statement. No American personnel were injured and no U.S. equipment was damaged. Iran calls it Shahed 129, CENTCOM calls it Shahed 139, so even the drone's model is disputed. Iran's state-linked media says the drone conducted surveillance in international waters and later lost contact after transmitting imagery. Iran's state-linked media offered a different version of the drone incident. According to Tasnim news agency, the drone was conducting a routine and legal mission of reconnaissance in international waters before contact was lost. Iranian media claims the drone transmitted imagery back to ground stations before contact was lost. The reason for the loss of contact is currently under review, the Iranian source said, according to state-linked reporting. This framing avoids acknowledging the drone was shot down while not directly contradicting the U.S. account. The Iranian version presents the drone's activity as legitimate surveillance rather than aggressive approach, and neither account can be independently verified. The discrepancy, even on the drone's model, Shahed 129 versus Shahed 139, illustrates how basic facts remain disputed between the two sides. Iran's naval leadership has warned it could block the Strait of Hormuz if the United States launches an attack, according to various reporting on Iranian statements. IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangsiri has reiterated Iran's capability to close the strait if ordered by higher authorities. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply, approximately 21 million barrels per day. Even brief disruptions could send shockwaves through global markets, with analysts suggesting oil prices could spike significantly. Whether Iran could actually close the strait and for how long is debated among naval analysts. The U.S. Navy maintains significant presence in the region specifically to ensure freedom of navigation through this critical choke point. Iran's warnings should be understood as deterrence messaging, signaling the costs of any U.S. military action. Whether they reflect actual Iranian plans or serve primarily rhetorical purposes cannot be determined from the statements alone. Iranian officials describe the U.S. deployment as threatening. U.S. officials describe it as defensive. This fundamental disagreement shapes how each side characterizes events in the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group operates in the Arabian Sea with F-35C, F/A-18, and EA-18G aircraft, plus destroyer escorts. This represents significant capability positioned in the region. From Iran's perspective, a massive foreign military force has been deployed near its territory, and Iranian defensive measures, including surveillance and warnings to vessels, are rational responses to this presence. From the U.S. perspective, the deployment is necessary to deter Iranian aggression and protect allies and commercial shipping. Both characterizations serve each side's narrative about who is responsible for escalation. Iranian and some regional commentators argue the same actions get labeled differently depending on who does them. U.S. officials reject that comparison. The debate over framing reflects broader disagreements about the situation. When the U.S. Navy sails through waters claimed by other nations, this is typically described in U.S. media as asserting international rights. When Iranian boats approach vessels in waters Iran claims, this is often described as harassment. The same logic applies to surveillance. The U.S. conducts extensive aerial and naval surveillance of Iran and other nations. When Iran conducts surveillance of U.S. forces near its territory, this is often characterized as threatening. Whether such comparisons are valid or represent false equivalence is itself disputed. U.S. officials argue the situations are fundamentally different. Iranian officials argue the principle is the same. Despite these incidents, diplomatic efforts reportedly continue. International outlets report talks are being planned, but details like venue and format have shifted in recent updates. The exact arrangements remain subject to confirmation. Iran's president has signaled openness to negotiations, according to Iranian statements and international reporting. The signal suggests Iranian willingness to engage diplomatically despite the military tensions. The White House stated that recent incidents had not altered planned dates for diplomatic discussions. This suggests both sides are compartmentalizing military friction from diplomatic engagement, at least for now. Iran's foreign ministry stated that the framework and methodology for negotiations would be ready in the coming days, according to the reporting. The diplomatic track proceeds alongside the military incidents. Iran's state media says Khamenei supports diplomacy only on mutual respect and rejects talks under threats, according to reporting on the supreme leader's position. The framing positions Iran is willing to engage, but only under certain conditions. The Iranian position, diplomacy, yes, but not under threat of force, represents a consistent stance across Iranian official statements. Whether the U.S. military deployment constitutes the kind of pressure Iran rejects is the central question. Iran's state media reported Khamenei's view that those who speak with respect will receive respect in return, while those who speak with threats will be responded to accordingly. The conditional framing sets parameters for engagement. These statements represent Iranian official messaging about negotiating conditions. Whether they reflect actual red lines or rhetorical positioning for domestic and international audiences cannot be determined from the statements alone. President Trump has combined military deployment with diplomatic pressure, according to reporting on the U.S. approach. Trump has warned of military action while also pressing Tehran to negotiate over its nuclear program. And Trump said the U.S. has ships heading to Iran and talks going on simultaneously, according to reported comments. The statement pairs diplomatic openness with military positioning. Trump said if talks could work something out, that would be great. But if not, probably bad things would happen, according to reported remarks. The statement combines negotiation offers with implicit warnings. The U.S. approach combines what might be called coercive diplomacy, using military positioning to pressure concessions. Whether this approach produces results or hardens positions is debated by analysts. The gap between reported U.S. demands and Iranian stated positions presents significant challenges for negotiations. Trump reportedly demands a complete halt to enrichment, limits on missiles, and changes to regional policies, points that Tehran has rejected. Ali Bagheri, the foreign policy deputy at Iran's Supreme National Security Council, said Iran has no intention of transferring enriched uranium abroad, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. Arakchi said Iran's defensive and missile capabilities would not be part of negotiations, according to Reuters. Iran has publicly stated uranium will not be transferred abroad, missiles are not negotiable, and talks must be conducted with mutual respect. These stated positions leave limited space for the kind of agreement the U.S. reportedly seeks. Whether the talks can find common ground within these stated constraints, or whether positions shift during actual negotiations, will determine the outcome. Opening positions in diplomacy often differ from final agreements. The Strait of Hormuz matters to far more than the U.S. and Iran. China has significant energy trade interests tied to flows through the strait. Japan, South Korea, India, and European nations all depend on oil and gas transiting this waterway. Any disruption, whether from conflict or from incidents escalating, would affect global energy markets and economies worldwide. This gives many nations interest in seeing tensions reduced reduced rather than escalated. And Saudi officials have said they will not allow their airspace to be used for strikes, and the UAE has reiterated its territory will not be used for hostile action, according to reports. These regional positions reflect concern about escalation. A regional diplomat told Reuters that representatives from countries such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt may also participate in upcoming talks. Regional involvement could add pressure for de-escalation from multiple directions. Analysts warn a single miscalculation could spiral. That is the core risk with forces operating close together. With military assets deployed and incidents occurring, the risk of unintended escalation is real. The drone shootdown and tanker incident occurring in close proximity demonstrate how quickly situations can develop, requiring immediate decisions. Such decisions made under pressure could trigger responses neither side intended. The parallel tracks of military positioning and diplomatic engagement create ongoing tension. An incident serious enough to derail talks or military action that preempts them remains possible despite both sides' stated interest in negotiation. Whether the diplomatic track can produce results while military incidents continue, or whether the military track eventually overwhelms diplomacy, remains the central question. The framing of who is escalating depends entirely on perspective. The U.S. has deployed major military force thousands of miles from its territory to waters near Iran. Iran is operating in its own region. From the U.S. perspective, Iran's nuclear program and regional activities justify military pressure. From Iran's perspective, U.S. military presence in its neighborhood justifies defensive preparations. The incidents in the Strait of Hormuz can be seen as Iranian harassment of commercial shipping or as Iranian response to intrusion into its territorial waters. The drone incident can be seen as Iranian aggression or as U.S. destruction of a surveillance asset in international waters. How these events are framed often reflects the perspective of the source rather than established fact. Both narratives have internal logic and supporting arguments. Verified, an incident involving the tanker MV Stina Imperative occurred in the Strait of Hormuz, confirmed by CENTCOM, UKMTO Advisory, and Maritime Risk Groups. USS McFall escorted the vessel. Verified. CENTCOM says an F-35C shot down an Iranian drone near the USS Abraham Lincoln. Iran state media says a Shahed drone lost contact after a surveillance mission. Disputed whether the tanker entered Iranian waters. CENTCOM says lawful transit. Iran says territorial intrusion. No shared data set resolves this. Disputed the drone's model, Shahed 129. Iran versus Shahed 139. CENTCOM. The number of boats involved, 2. CENTCOM versus 6. WSJ citing officials. The Strait of Hormuz incidents illustrate how the same events generate competing narratives. CENTCOM says Iranian boats harassed a U.S.-flagged tanker during transit. Iranian state-linked outlets say the tanker entered Iranian waters and left after being warned. Neither account can be independently verified. The drone incident similarly produces competing versions. CENTCOM says an F-35C shot down an aggressive Iranian drone in self-defense. Iranian media says the drone completed its surveillance mission before contact was lost. Despite these incidents, diplomatic efforts reportedly continue. International outlets report talks are being planned, but details have shifted. Iran's president has signaled openness to negotiations. The parallel tracks of military friction and diplomatic engagement proceed. The coming days will test whether diplomacy can succeed despite incidents, or whether military dynamics overwhelm the negotiating track. How we frame these events, who is the aggressor, who is responding, depends on which account we accept. In the Strait of Hormuz, competing narratives are the norm rather than the exception.